Yeah.
You didn't mess with the elders. You wouldn't mess with a pregnant woman. You wouldn't have a little kid on the corner, with a package. You respected a lot of the community elders and the community leaders. I mean, we can get back to it, Kerwin, but it's going to take a radical shift in our thinking. Part of the challenge now is we invest most of our time, energy, talent, and treasure into getting people elected to offices, public officials. And for me, imagine if the money we spent on campaigns for elected officials, city council, alderman, mayor, U.S. senator, whatever. Imagine if we reinvested that money back into people that are going to legitimately do the work on the ground, right? Okay. So that's one strategy. We got to change our mindset.
Malik's First Job Podcast, here to answer any questions that y'all ask. Financial literacy and resources, parents and young people becoming bosses, CEOs, future leaders, entrepreneurs, conferences and boardrooms getting sponsors secured. If you want generational wealth, Brooklyn's own Kerwin Phillip with information to help. Malik's First Job Podcast, Malik's Podcast, Brooklyn's own Kerwin Phillip, Kerwin Phillip. Malik's First Job Podcast, Brooklyn's own Kerwin Phillip. Generational wealth.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. How you doing? This is Kerwin Phillip again with another episode of the Malik's First Job Podcast, where we focus in on leadership, entrepreneurship, and financial literacy for parents and teens. Today, we have a very remarkable brother coming out of Baltimore, Maryland, Mr. David Miller. He's a well-known speaker, author. There's so many titles that's out there for him, as I can't even list them all, right? But we're going to get into a good conversation about the work that he's doing and things that he can see that he wants to. We were just saying a few minutes ago that a lot of times we talk about the issues taking place in our community, but what about some of the solutions, right? To kind of help the young men and young women that we're raising to be future leaders and our entrepreneurs. All right. So David, how you doing today?
Man, I'm doing good, man. Long day, as most days are, man. Long day, but I'm every day I wake up, man, I'm fighting a good fight.
Definitely. So for people who aren't familiar with you, like, how would you want to introduce yourself? Let people know who you are exactly.
So I'm a son of Baltimore, affectionately known as Tubman City, named after Harriet Tubman. Raised by two outstanding parents, Peter and Carol Miller. I currently take care of my dad, which is probably one of the biggest joys of my life, being able to take care of my dad as an elder. And I'm actually going to be working on a book next year about the Black caregiver tradition, if you will, that Black folks been taking care of their parents and older relatives for a long time. And a lot of times we don't talk about the struggles of, you grow up, you raise your children, and now you got to raise and support your parents. And so I'm real passionate, man, about our people. I think that in the Black community, we have all of the essential ingredients to be the great people that we once were. The challenge is what I consider to be like operational unity and coming to the table and agreeing on, even if we can agree on a couple of things. I know, we can be diverse in terms of our thought, but we at least got to come together around our children, right? If we can't come together around the healthy social and emotional development of our children, then we're not going to win. If we can't come together around the protection and safety of Black women, we're not going to win. If we can't come together around the protecting of our elders, you look over the last 6 months, man, I've been blown away by the kind of incidents that have happened, violent incidents where young people have attacked elders in Baltimore and in Philly, in Chicago, across the country. If we can't get on one accord about protecting our elders, and last one, if we can't come on one accord that as Black folks in America, we need to try to spend the lion's share of our money with people that look like us and or people that really support Black causes, then we're not going to win. And so I'm a writer, I'm an educator, I'm finishing up my PhD in the School of Social Work at Morgan State University. My research looks at Black fathers raising daughters. I've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years. I've been self-employed. My main body of work is I create content, I create products, I write books, I write curriculum content. I design programs for youth, for families. And so that's been really my body of work over the last 25 or so years.
Okay. So what was like the initial motivation for you to get into this work?
So, like many folk who answer the call to become change agents in our community, and some people shouldn't have answered the phone, right? But that's a whole nother conversation, because we got too many people working with our children that don't even like children. But that's another conversation. Man, I was at Morgan State, and my best friend was at Morehouse. He had come home during summer vacation, and we were standing in front of a nightclub in West Baltimore. Some guys tried to rob us at gunpoint. We didn't have the money. They started shooting. I lived, he died.
Wow.
And so the tragedy of watching my best friend like literally die in my arms, we weren't gang members. I wasn't a Crip or Blood or Gangster Disciple. We were young Black males in college in America. Wasn't gang banging, wasn't selling crack, wasn't selling dope. And so it dramatically altered my life. And even though that happened August 11th, 1989, which is a long time ago, it's left an indelible mark on my psyche. I will never be the same person. And so instead of self-destructing, I took the pain, the tragedy, and I decided that I really wanted to focus a large percentage of my work on how do we engage young Black males at a different level, right? How do we show, coach, teach Black males and the general society? Because there are a lot of Black people who have given up on young Black males, right? How do we show the larger community that many of our sons operate at the genius level, but they don't necessarily have allies and support system to really actualize their potential genius? And so for me, and I'm just sharing one, there were a number of, tragedies that had happened to me. And then over a period of maybe about 7 or 8 years, about 5 or 6 of my really close homeboys committed suicide. So that was another trauma on top of, the trauma of seeing my best friend die. And so for me, it was either I'm a self-destruct, go to prison, or I'm just going to radically change my life and kind of get on the other side of what we find happening in so many urban communities, which is, selling drugs or, these vices, right? America is the country where, sadly, so many of us got a negative vice, whether it's popping pills, it could be a sex addict, some people addicted to social media, you name it. And so I decided, that I was going to minimize the vices in my life, strippers, whatever it is. I was going to minimize the vices in my life, and I was going to live the way that the Creator and my parents intended me to live. And I was going to turn my tragedy as well as my academic training, because I dropped out of Morgan, but ended up transferring to the University of Baltimore, got my undergraduate degree, then got my master's degree in education, and now finishing up the PhD in social work. And so that's really who I am. I'm unapologetic. I'm non-compromising. Most people, it's hard for them to really understand where I'm coming from, and I'm coming from a place of. And I just wrote a piece for a brother this morning. He asked me what I thought about all, the large percentage of Black males who are being shot and killed across the country by other Black males. We should be in the street, man.
Right.
You know, we just had a 9-year-old in Baltimore 2 weeks ago shoot a 15-year-old girl in the head. We should be in the street. We should be outraged by the level of homicides and shootings that are occurring. But what happens is, Kerwin, and I know it's hard for us to conceptualize when a police officer kills an unarmed black male. We shutting highways down. We flipping cars over in the street. But when we're killing each other in record numbers in Baltimore and in DC, I just read that down there in Richmond where you are, young sister, 15, shot and killed in a drive-by shooting.
Yeah.
We should be outraged, because if this was happening to white boys and girls, the National Guard would be mobilized. Federal, state, and local officials would be swift and calculated in terms of their response. But when it happens to us, we do candlelight vigils and we reach out to like football players and basketball players and ask them to come to the black community to talk to us. We ought to be ashamed of ourselves. I mean, when you really look at the data, Kerwin, and I'm just talking about black males, we ain't even got to the number of young women who are involved in violent crime and going to prison. If we just look at the number of young black males who are killed every year in the United States, mainly based on interpersonal violence, you know, arguments or whatever the case may be, we ought to be ashamed of ourselves, man. And we should be rushing to enact, you know, policies, because policies are still important. But then in the grassroots, in terms of the things that we need to do with young people in schools and community, we ought to be ashamed of ourselves, man.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, maybe not so funny, but I remember like several years ago, I had made a decision to leave corporate America and to go into the classroom. I wanted to, you know, kind of, you know, give back to the community, because a lot of people talk about they want to help the younger generations, but are you taking steps to actually do so? So I said, okay, I want to go into the classroom, and didn't realize, right? Because, you know, of course, me not having a background in teaching, I thought it was going to go one way, right? You know, but then when I got there, it was like totally different, and I wasn't even expecting, what I experienced. Like, one of the major things that I kind of took away from that experience was the amount of trauma that our young people deal with on a daily basis. You know, like you speak about all these different shootings taking place in these communities. What about the children that are the best friend, you know, the neighbor of that child, you know, that was taken away? They got to go back to school the next day. How do they deal with that? How do they process it? And oftentimes these children don't even get counseling or, the help that they need. And let's talk about the impact that lack of counseling and support. How does that impact the community as well?
It robs you of your childhood, man. I mean, imagine that there's so many just think about it like this, Kerwin, to your point. There's so many zip codes in the United States where children go to sleep every night listening to gunfire. I mean, just marinate on that for a moment. That it may not be me, it may not be you, but there are children that are growing up in zip codes where every single night they listening to gunfire. And then when they get to school, the next morning, they find out that Wayne's cousin was shot and killed in front of the gas station, or the man at the barber shop who cuts my hair, his son was shot and killed, or his daughter was shot and killed, and so, or my classmate, was shot and killed. And so there's a role for all of us, but we got to make the investment in like some of the kinds of work that you were doing, like in the library, around working with young people, around being more conscious consumers of hip hop. You know what I'm saying? That's a body of work that's so important, because a lot of the music that these young people are listening to, I mean, it's like crack cocaine. It's just delivered on wax. You put the earpods in, and you listening to death and destruction and mediocrity and rape and pillage through songs. And so there's a role for all of us. Adopting a school, we got so many churches in the community. Adopt an elementary school and start a reading program, right? Create a program for young fathers. I mean, there's a role for all of us. We just got to get busy, man. Because like you said, entire communities in this country, right? I'm from Baltimore, live in DC. I would say 70%, 70 to 75% of the people that live in Baltimore live in communities that have been grossly impacted by trauma.
Right. Yes. And I think again that's pretty much every major urban area across the country is having that same experience. And something that I thought, like you had mentioned earlier, that a lot of the adults are scared almost of these young people that's coming up now. And I remember, not too long ago going back to Brooklyn and speaking to some of the, the folks I grew up with, a lot of the OGs I grew up with. They're like, man, these kids are crazy, right? And these are cats that was in the streets back in the day, and they were wilding out back then, but now they come to an older age, like, these kids are far worse than what we were back when we were coming up, And I remember back again when I was, through my teenage years, young adult years, there was stuff going on in the streets, but there was almost like a sense of order, or there was codes back then, Is that something that can be brought back? And if so, how can that be implemented back within the community?
So you make a good point. Same thing. When I was growing up, there was even a code of ethics among drug dealers.
Yeah.
You didn't mess with the elders. You wouldn't mess with a pregnant woman. You wouldn't have a little kid on the corner, with a package. You respected a lot of the community elders and the community leaders. I mean, we can get back to it, Kerwin, but it's going to take a radical shift in our thinking. Part of the challenge now is we invest most of our time, energy, talent, and treasure into getting people elected to offices, public officials. And for me, imagine if the money we spent on campaigns for elected officials, city council, alderman, mayor, U.S. senator, whatever. Imagine if we reinvested that money back into people that are going to legitimately do the work on the ground. Right? Okay. So that's one strategy. We got to change our mindset. Second strategy is we got to demand more from particularly churches. Now, I know oftentimes the misnomer is that churches are bringing in all of this money. I know that that's not necessarily true with a lot of small to medium-sized Black churches, but the churches have something that's more important than money. They got human capital. They got folk, they got believers, right? So how do we marshal the men and women in that church? How do we utilize the fact that the church is in the community? Church got space. Most of the time, people that want to run programs can't find space. Can they use the church? A lot of times the church got vans. Can we work something out where we can use the vans to take these children camping or hiking or fishing or wherever? So again, there are things that we can do. I'm just not convinced we've suffered enough as a community, because I just can't understand it, man.
Right. Malik's First Job, Financial Principles for Teens, is an excellent resource to get your children started on understanding the basics of financial literacy. This book, which is set in Brownsville, Brooklyn, about a young man who gets his first job and then shortly thereafter sits down with his dad to learn how to manage his money. There are several topics that are covered within this work, such as paying yourself first, disciplining your spending, knowing the difference between an asset and a liability, creating multiple sources of income, as well as the importance of being charitable. So again, if you want to get your children started on understanding finance and becoming responsible adults, we highly recommend that you purchase the book, Malik's First Job, Financial Principles for Teens. So please visit maliksfirstjob.com to get more information. Peace. As I think we had mentioned earlier, there's a lot of talking taking place, right? Like you saw, it's like a cycle. Like someone gets murdered, there's a candlelight vigil, then there's a meeting at the church to talk about, what the what the next steps are to prevent this from happening again. You know, people gather for maybe a couple weeks or so, and then it dies off until the next thing happens. And it goes on over and over and over again, right? How do we break that cycle? You know, is it just, you know, someone just has to take a stand?
Some of it is in any city you go to. So if I asked you, Kerwin, to name 5 or 6 brothers and sisters in Richmond that are change agents, that are working with different populations, that are doing great work, one of the things that we got to do is there are things that are working, but they're under-resourced.
True.
Right?
Right.
So what's the sister's name? And you've introduced me to a couple of times in Richmond who does, and we just saw when we were in Richmond last week, the sister who works with the girls and her dads.
Oh, yeah, Angela Patton.
So Angela Patton, why can't we give Angela Patton $3 million? Right? The issue a lot of times is there are people that are doing good work. I mean, I've known people who have died, like they've worked themselves to death doing this work on behalf of the community, but they're under-resourced. So that's part of the problem. It's not that the work is not being done. It's not being resourced and scaled up. And then we spending money in every city on nonsense. We got money for everything under the sun, but when it comes to engaging young people, working with families, there's no money available.
Like Tupac said, they got money for war, but can't feed the poor, right?
Come on, man. Come on, man. I mean, again, think about your top 5 folks in Richmond, and imagine if they had, you know, $2 million unrestricted for $10 million, and we build in an evaluation component. So we build in like maybe a university to do an evaluation to determine what's working and what's not working. If we find elements of the model that's not working, you know, we reconfigure them or figure out a way to increase those outcomes. And then, you know, like at the end of at every year, we give a report on what's being done. Those are some of the kinds of things that we need to be done. Those are some of the kinds of things we need to do because people are doing great work. They're just under-resourced and they're not scaled up to the point where instead of working with 20 youth that they're doing a good job on the east side, the next year we need to make sure that they're working with 20 on the west side. So they 20 on the east side, 20 on the west side. Now they serving 40 children. Then we go over to the south side. Then we go over to the north side. So they started working with 20. Now every year they're able to scale up. So in 5 years, 10 years, they'll be able to make a dent. Like these programs that are serving 10, 15 young people, admirable, but they're not making a dent. And so we got to figure out how do we scale that work up.
Right. So these are all like pretty much resources outside the home, right?
Yeah.
What can parents do inside the household to ensure that their children are getting what they need? What can parents do themselves? Like what do they have within their control to help raise their children up, you know, in a noble manner?
So there's a couple things. I always ask parents, do you love your children? I mean, that's the first question, because if you really love your children, that means that you want to see your children grow up healthy and be successful. And if that is the case, there needs to be a level of intentionality when it comes to parenting.
Okay.
And that comes down to everything from, again, my mother passed away a couple years ago. I can still hear my mother in my ear, like, you don't have no friends that we don't know about. See, when you were in the Black community, you couldn't just say, I'm going over to Michael's house. Who was Michael? I don't know Michael. I don't know Michael's parents. And so, again, there needs to be an intentionality of all aspects of your child's life, from what's happening at the school. And even if you work in 2 jobs, you got to find somebody in your family who can go to the PTA meetings, or you got to have an ongoing, active, vibrant relationship with your child's teacher. You have to be involved in every aspect of your child's life. If your child has a cell phone, it's your cell phone. You got to, I trip off the fact that parents would be like, my son is 9 and I don't even have the codes to his phone. So, okay, your son is 9. You pay for the phone, but you can't just access the phone whenever you want to. So there's a level of intentional parenting, whether they 5 or whether they 15. As they move into sort of, out of the baby stage and the talking and the going to school, it's really time for parents to really begin to informally assess what their children are good at and begin to expose them to careers, not when they're 17 and graduate from high school. You start introducing them to careers when they're 6 or 7 years old based on things that they take interest in. Again, intentional parenting. I'm not big on the beating and the spanking and all that kind of stuff. But if you instill the kind of discipline and respect in your children when they're young, you will never have to lay hands on them. And so again, this work that we're doing with parents, it can't be by happenstance. It's got to be intentional.
Right. And I know that you do like a lot of workshops with with young men, and you also have like several books, right? I know like one of the books that you have, I guess one of the curriculums that you're mostly known for is the Dare to Be King curriculum, right? How did that come about, and what impact has that had in the community over the years?
See that? That's our curriculum, Dare to Be King. What if the Prince lives? I realized, given some of the things that I experienced growing up in West Baltimore, and being able to become college educated, that I needed to take, sort of the innate street knowledge and skills that I had, coupled with the fact that I had a college degree, that I could put that together to begin to teach, train, and coach young people how to navigate growing up in toxic environments. And so the curriculum, is probably one of the most comprehensive curriculum models you'll find, in the country. Getting ready to do some work. In back in Chicago. Have not been to Chicago since the pandemic. Gonna be doing some work with some juveniles in the great city of in Chicago, if our negotiations go right. But the curriculum is designed to teach young people how to deal with the inevitability that there are going to be some things that are going to happen because you are Black, you're male, and you live in America. So, for example, you're going to be stopped by the police. It's not if, it's when. And so what are the rules of engagement when stopped by the police? My work, 10 Rules of Survival, and I'll put this up if you can see that, 10 Rules of Survival if stopped by the police, was featured in CNN. It went viral a couple years ago, was featured in every major news outlet in the country. And people were like, why did you create that? Well, I created it because those are the lessons that I learned when I was 13, 14 years old, in terms of I got to live through the police stop, right? I don't care how many episodes of Law and Order you watch. You don't need to be trying to have a confrontation with a police officer when he got a gun, a taser, handcuffs, and mace. You need to live through the stop. And then if you feel like your civil rights have been violated, then you talk to your parents. And so there's a whole section in the curriculum around navigating encounters with the police. The curriculum deals with things like, for a lot of these little guys, what I call the daddy rage. They're angry, frustrated, and upset because for whatever reason, they don't have an ongoing active relationship with their father, and they are mad as hell. What I find in working with a lot of young men that have committed violent offenses, the seat of a lot of their anger comes from not having a relationship with their dad. So there's a section in there about getting these young men to not blame themselves because their dad and mom couldn't get on the same page, and dad hasn't been, the life-giving, life-affirming adult male figure that the young brother has needed in his life. There's a section in there on, peer pressure. I mean, you name it, we cover it in the curriculum. And the curriculum is designed to be used in schools, communities, churches, to really engage young Black males at a higher level.
Right. Now, in addition to like the curriculum that you have, there's some other books that you've written as well, right? I know you emphasize the importance of like books with Black characters, and can you speak to that as well?
Mm.
And why that's important?
Representation matters, and I think so. When you see, some of the books that I've written, I really believe that Black children need to see themselves, and I only have a couple of the books on my desk right now, that Black children need to see themselves in the literature, because oftentimes we're so demonized by the general society that identity is super important, man. And you need to see images of people that look like you that are doing positive things. So all of the books that I write, and I got one or two real serious pieces coming out before the end of the year, and then I'm gonna take a little hiatus from writing the children's books. But the children love the books. I mean, Kurt, when I go to a school, when I do a school visit, it's literally like Jay-Z walks in the building. It's like Jay-Z is in the building, man. The love, the respect that I get from the young people, and it's like, yo, you wrote that book, and I'm gonna get a copy of it. And so this is a message to anyone who listens to this particular broadcast. Well, buy a set of children's books and do an event at a school, either yourself or with your friends and family. It can make a tremendous difference in the life of young people, because they don't always see this.
Right.
You turn on the 6 o'clock news. When you turn on the news in most cities, it's about who got stabbed, who got shot. They put a couple mug shots of a Black male on the screen. So that's one of the reasons why I write the books that I write.
Yeah. So, and I guess what's your thoughts on like the the recent what trailer they just released about the Little Mermaid, and a lot of the reaction that's been taking place online? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, it really, the issue with the Little Mermaid, the issue with the book bans. I'm real good friends with Jerry Craft, New York Times best-selling author. We just talked again a couple of days ago. Some of his books were banned in Texas. Once again, man, it's racism and white supremacy, man. We don't want to tell the truth. We don't want to be honest about stuff. The only time we really want to talk about diversity and equity is when we have like a George Floyd kind of moment, man. America just does not want to deal with its own, racism, man. And the whole thing about the mermaid, it's a cartoon. It's something that's not even real. So whether or not you put the image, if it's a Black girl this year, next year it's an Asian girl, the year after that the girl is Latino. I mean, we talk about diversity, but we ain't really for it, man.
Right. And I know oftentimes when you speak, like I guess going back to the books, like you speak about the diversity in children's literature, right? Do you have some of those statistics on hand that you kind of speak about?
Yeah, well, there really is no diversity in children's books. If you look at a study done by the University of Wisconsin, they do a study like every year on the lack of diversity in children's books. About 30%, and my number could be off, I don't have it right in front of me, about 30% of the children's books in this country are written about animals as the main character. Less than 30% I think it may be like 27% of the children's books in this country are written where the main character is Black, Latinx, Asian, or Native American. So you have more books written about animals than you do about children of color.
Wow.
And so the publishing industry is lily white. Most of the people who have the ability to green light a book, agents, publishing houses, are white. Now, people will say that it's changing incrementally, but it's not changing fast enough. Because when we think about the browning of this nation, there needs to be more diversity in children's literature.
Yeah. So I think there's like a lot of, I guess, with the different resources available now, like with Amazon, KDP, Ingram Sparks, you see like an influx of independent authors. I think those numbers are going to change. Hopefully, quicker than sooner than later. But I think we're starting to see an influx. You started seeing a lot of more independent authors coming out with a lot of diverse product for young people.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. So we're about to wrap up soon, but before we wrap up, can you speak to some of the work that you do in Africa as well?
Yeah. So I just got back in the country, man. Was at the University of Ghana for 5 weeks. Anybody who knows me knows I got to get you over there, Kerwin. Knows I love spending time on the continent. And even though, West Africa, Ghana in particular, because I've been to Ghana more times than I've been to any other country in Africa. I've been to Ghana 11 times. Mm-hmm. The nation of Ghana has its own set of challenges, but it's peaceful. It provides me with a level of peace and tranquility and safety, because I don't feel safe in any city in the U.S. I feel safer overseas I feel safer overseas than I do here. But I was at the University of Ghana for 5 weeks, beginning the first part of it's called the Fulbright Hayes Study Abroad Project, where myself and 13 other educators spent time in Ghana visiting schools. We spent some time in Parliament meeting with, the elected officials in Ghana. We spent some time understanding about Ghana's commitment to, STEM and technology with girls. Spent some time in some of the most remote parts of the country. Definitely spent a lot of time in Accra. And we took all of that research, and we've designed a series of curriculum templates that teachers can use for children K through 12th grade, which teaches them about life in Africa, specifically Ghana. Because we do a horrible job in this country about teaching about geography and particularly about Africa. And so those curriculum templates will be loaded up on the U.S. Department of Ed's website so that any educators will be able to download it.
Okay. Great. All right, so I'm gonna let you go. I know you said you had like a long day today. All right, so any thoughts that you want to use, anything that you want to say before you wrap up, any messages you want to give to the people?
I always tell three things, three solutions focused things. Mentor a Black child in your community or at a school, or go through an organization like Big Brothers or Big Sisters or the YMCA or the Boys and Girls Club. If your schedule doesn't allow you to mentor, donate. A lot of nonprofits have a thing where they can deduct $25, $30 out of your account every month. That money adds up when you think about under-resourced organizations that are doing good work. Your $30 times 12 over 5 years could pay for books, materials, supplies, trips, and outings. So mentor, volunteer, just do something that is advancing our people. That's all I ask for.
Okay, great. And for those that want to reach out to you and learn more about, your books, where you can get them, where can they find you online?
So you can go to both of my websites. One is probably, it may pop back up on the screen. For anything related to my children's books, IamDavidMiller.com. Anything related to the work that I do with young Black males, daretobeking.net. That's spell it out, DARETOBEKING.net.
Okay, put that on there for you.
And Kerwin, I want to thank you for the yeoman's work that you're doing around this whole thing about financial literacy, brother. That's a whole nother. We gotta become. We got to get more serious about our money, and we got to be able to fund our own freedom, man. So thank you for the work. I hope all of your people have bought at least 10 copies of your book, man. And just buy books and give them away, man.
Oh yeah. I got a few people who do that. They reach out to me, every so often, say, look, I need to get a so-and-so number of books. I'm doing this book drive. I'm doing this event. I just want to give the books to the kids, man. So, I do have people out there that do that. So definitely appreciate it. So again, thanks for taking time.
Thank you, brother.
Join us today. I know I'm gonna see you at the next event.
I'll see you on Saturday, man. I'll probably get there late afternoon.
Okay. Great.
All right, brother. Be safe.
You as well. All right. So again, thank you all for joining us today on the Malik's First Job podcast, and I'll see y'all next week. Peace.
Generational wealth.